Welcome to Prophecy in the News. My name is Dr. Kevin Clarkson, and I'm your host. I am glad today to be having a vigorous discussion with Jonathan Cahn. He is a Jewish brother who knows Jesus and is a pastor in New Jersey now. You call it Beth Israel, House of Israel?
It's Beth Israel, and the place is called the Jerusalem Center. We're about 20 minutes outside New York City in Wayne, New Jersey.
Yes. Tell us a bit about your ministry locally, if you could.
Yeah, it's Jew and Gentile, people from all nations. It's literally a United Nations of people with a Jewish flavor. We celebrate the holidays. Very shortly, we're going to be sounding the trumpet.
Oh, boy.
And it's prophetic, you know, and it's right right near New York City, but it's been it looks like Jerusalem if you go in there.
Does it
Literally,
really?
The walls are. You have the gates of Jerusalem. You have everything. It's like you're in
Oh,
Jerusalem.
my.
Yeah, yeah. So
Incredible.
yeah.
Maybe I'll get to visit
That'd be
sometime.
wonderful.
Hello, I'm Dr. Kevin Clarkson, excited to invite you to the second annual Orlando Prophecy Summit. It's taking place this March 5, 6, and 7, 2015, and I'd love for you to be our guest. It's going to be in sunny Orlando, Florida, as I mentioned. We have an incredible lineup of speakers for you this year. The New York Times best-selling author Jonathan Cahn will be there, and his brand new book is breaking the record set by his first book, The Harbinger. And Bill Salus has made the forgotten prophecies of the Bible come back to life. Psalm 83 and Jeremiah 49 are prophecies that were written for our times. Paul McGuire wowed the crowds in Colorado Springs with his presentation. Paul will definitely be having something new and exciting up his sleeve for us in Orlando. These are just a few of the prophecy experts that are going to be with us. You can register, and the cost is only $90, and these 3 days of exciting teaching are going to be available to you by calling 1-800-475-1111. Well, listen, we are of great interest in your new book. I have it right here, The Mystery of the Shemitah.
Mm-hmm.
And this follows the Harbinger,
Yes.
and a
Yes.
3,000-year-old mystery that holds the secret of America's future, the world's future, and your future.
Yes.
Our future.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, we have already discussed a bit about the background of the Harbinger and where we are.
Yeah.
We're actually about a year out from the close of
Yeah.
another 7-year cycle. That's what tell us what Shemitah means
Yes,
and where it came
yes,
from.
Yeah. Yeah. The Shemitah, and just for those who haven't heard, the Shemitah is a 3,000-year-old mystery that begins with God giving this to Moses, that the 7th year was the Shemitah, was the Sabbath year. No work, nothing of the land rest. On the last day, Elul 29, last day, kind of all builds to a peak. On the last day, you have this financial wipe out, all debts, all wiped out, and the Shemitah was to be a blessing, but when Israel turned away from God, it became the sign of judgment on a nation that had driven God out of its life, that strikes the financial realm, and it wipes away, and it can even wipe away physical realities and nations. In 586 BC, judgment comes. It's all based on the timing of the Shemitah. So the Shemitah is crucial. And what we've seen, and what I had an idea of in the Harbinger, it begins, because I saw those two amazing, really, manifestations in 2001 and 2008. But I knew there was more, but I didn't know how much more. This mystery has been affecting everything, everywhere, all our lives. We can look at our lives, and you can see that the Shemitah has been affecting everything from the financial realm, the rising and falling of the stock market, of the economy, of nations, the rise of America, fall of America, what may be, the world wars, global cataclysms, end time prophecy. It's the key of the timing, and it's amazing.
As I've been learning more about this, I thought, boy, if we can connect the dots, and then I realized we're connecting the Shemitahs.
Yeah.
Because something significant, it seems to be happening at every point. And I don't know if your research told you economically or any economist weighed in on this. God must have had a purpose in letting them reset their debts every 7 years, resetting their credit. That would have been positive.
It was positive.
I do know, and I don't know much about it, but I do know that when home mortgages were first rolled out in early America, they were for 7 years.
I heard that.
They were based on Scripture.
I heard that. Yeah, and I heard the interesting thing. I'm going to throw something in that's not even in the book. But one of the things is there are certain times when the manifestation of the Shemitah in the behind the rise and fall of Wall Street or the economy, and we've talked about other ones, that it's amazing, their time to that. But it's stronger in some periods and lesser in other periods. And the interesting thing is that, okay, why is it stronger here, like the Great Depression and all that. And then in the last 40 years, and not and
Was
it's
there a
still,
pattern?
well, here's the amazing thing. A financial analyst came to me, showed me a graph. And the thing is that there's something called, it's the debt ratio. And what happens is when you have more debt, remember the Shemitah wipes away debt.
Right.
When you have more debt, the debt ratio in America, the Shemitah, the manifestation becomes more intense. When you have less, it's less. And so our debt has been continually rising and rising. And
Well,
so what are we watching? What are
We are
doing?
headed for a Lulu.
We are watching that. We said before how the phenomenon 2001, 2008 has been getting more and more intense. So it's so perfect. I mean, that's exactly what the Bible says.
I believe in 2008 our national debt was near maybe 5 to 6 trillion. As we approach this coming one next fall, we'll be up to
Bigger.
17, 18 trillion.
That's right. That's right.
That
That's
doesn't
right.
portend good things.
Doesn't portend good. Yeah. Yeah. So you have this. So as you said, I mean, on one hand, there's a positive thing, but on the other hand, when the nation turns against God, these things happen just like with Israel. Because what happened is they didn't observe the Shemitah, which was positive. So it came upon them in 586 BC, and that God said, and he said from the beginning in the Torah, he said, now the land is going to rest. Now the land is going to observe the Shemitah. So it's going to come, if it doesn't come naturally, it's going to come by force.
Yes.
It comes as judgment. So now what we're watching in America, the Shemitah is holding the key about judgment of a nation. And the debt is a sign of that. Because remember, in the Bible, one of the things it says, a sign of blessing is that you are not in debt, you are lending to nations. But if you turn away from God, God said to Israel, you're going to be in debt. In debt. America turned from being the greatest creditor nation to the greatest debtor nation.
That's right.
So and the
And that
Shemitah-
began happening in the 1970s, didn't it?
not well. You have two things. In the 1980s, it shifted. That shifted. In the 1970s, around 72, 73, where which was also a key year, that's when really the debt ratio explodes. Explodes.
Yeah,
and
that's what
where
I mean.
And that's where the Shemitah gets more and more intense, and linked to not only the economy, but even again the very landscape of nations. When we're talking about the potential of America falling. I mean,
Yes.
one way or the other. Yeah. So here we have another one upon us.
And we're seeing behind all of this the hand of God in
How
ways that humans
precise.
can't control.
Yeah, because I mean,
Too many variables.
Exactly.
Billions of trades every minute
That's it.
on computers.
Yeah.
And no man could direct this.
Nobody.
No government could direct this.
No conspiracy could direct it because this is every transaction in the world pretty much.
Yes.
And every whim, every hunch that someone has, sell, buy, sell, and it all converged 2001, converges on the greatest crash happens on the exact day appointed for over 3,000 years down to the
And
second.
that's the last day of the year, the
Elul
29th.
29, the day of nullification, when the financial realm is wiped out. The peak of the Shemitah comes the greatest crash in American history. And then, as we saw, 7 exact years, biblical years later, comes the other greatest crash. Exactly down. I mean, and
Yes.
Kevin, this is down to bell to bell. This is down to, talk about precise days, hours, minutes, and seconds.
And I might remind our viewers, and you refine it if you want, but basically a biblical year is slightly different because it's based on a lunar cycle.
Yeah, it's a lunar solar cycle, but yes. So it's not. For instance, the Shemitah
Right.
reaches its peak in 2001, a 7-year cycle, on September 17th, 2001. And that comes the greatest crash. That's Elul 29.
Right.
7 years later, it's September 29th comes the greatest crash, but that's Elul 29 on the biblical calendar. So the exact same day on the biblical calendar, down to the seconds. I mean,
And to mention the mystery of the sevens again, it was 777-point drop.
on the peak of the 7th
And you said
year,
if we walk backwards from that, 7 years,
it leads you in time.
7 days and 7 hours.
It leads you to the exact moment of the first crash in 2001, and then 7 days and 7 hours leads you to the very hour of 9/11.
Wow.
I mean, and the other thing is that we touched on it, but the ramifications are gigantic because what it means is if that first crash, and this all begins, if that 2001 crash, it was caused by 9/11. 9/11 came, shut down the market
Yes.
for like a week, and then it opens up on that following Monday, and everything crashes. So it's 9/11 crashing the markets on the day of the Shemitah. So even 9/11 had to happen at the exact time. So this is so big, so gigantic. I'll throw something in that's just extra.
Yes.
That on the when 9/11 froze the markets, it was frozen at a certain number for an entire week. The number was 9605, frozen. Okay, 8 years later, on the anniversary of
Is
9/11,
that the Dow average?
that was the Dow average,
9605, okay.
8 years later, on the anniversary of 9/11, on 9/11, it returned to 9605. And even Wall Street, they say, we're spooked. But 9605 is interesting, not to get dogmatic here, but it's 9, and then it's 605 equals 11. The number was 9/11.
Wow.
Frozen.
That is spooky.
Frozen. But this is what there's fingerprints.
Spooky is a term for God
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. Well, yeah, or yeah, and
He's holy.
Listen, all this stuff, is, you could say, eerie or amazing, because you were watching, like, even with the Harbingers, people saying things and they don't know what they're saying, and they're saying the exact words.
Exactly.
And this is all linked together. What we're watching, Kevin, is in this last period is the phenomenon is magnifying and getting more intense. You have the last two crashes on the exact days. So what that is leading to, what that would lead to, it's getting more intense at the same moment that America is departing from God more rapidly.
And on that note, can I say something probably that is so obvious we really haven't discussed it because we're assuming it, but we really need to think about it out in the open. We talked about the failure of America with marriage and with family and just the coarseness and the immorality. But when God judges a nation, he topples their false gods.
Yes.
He sent plagues on Egypt, and those were their false gods. Darkened the sun, that worshiped the Nile River,
Yes.
and then Pharaoh's son was going to be the next
Yes.
in line to be God, so he was struck dead. There's no doubt that America worships money.
Mm-hmm.
That is really our idol that's going to be toppled in this judgment. And we reach in our pocket and it says, in God we trust.
Yeah,
but
it's
really it's in gold we trust.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. One of the signs of judgment is exactly that, is that which the nation trusts in apart from God, or the gods of the nation, are judged. The World Trade Center was a symbol of America's financial prosperity, economic prosperity, and it was this mystery we talked about before that's in the book. It's the mystery of the towers, which is the pride of a nation. Mm-hmm. And then you have, we won't get into it because there's so much, but the sycamore was one of the harbingers. The sycamore was the sign of Wall Street's rise. Wall Street was called the Sycamore Association. And so here the sycamore was struck down right on Wall Street. So you have exactly what you said. What the nation trusts in. And, you have another thing here. One of the harbingers, and this is where the Shemitah and the harbinger come together, because that's another scary thing, because they're coming together.
Yes.
And that is that one of the harbingers is the tower that's going up at ground zero. And this is linked to the pride of a nation. We will rebuild. We'll come back stronger without
defiance.
God. Yeah, it's the symbol. It's the epitome, is this tower. So this tower is rising. Now, the tower began, it was actually spoken into existence the day after 9/11, when Tom Daschle, the Senate Majority Leader, pronounced judgment on America, pronounced Isaiah 9:10, the vow of judgment that led to Israel's destruction after its attack. He pronounces it and says, we will rebuild. Well, that tower was birthed with that prophetic judgment, which, so here it's, and Kevin.
So from the beginning, judgment's written on it.
You said a lot, because not only you said judgment's written on it, I don't know if you know this part, that after the book came out, this is one of the harbingers are continuing.
Tell us about some things happened since the publication.
So first you have a tower that's birthed in this vow of judgment, and it was the last week of the Shemitah. So the tower was birthed in the Shemitah, this tower that's coming.
Oh boy.
And it looks like the tower may be completed in this coming Shemitah. So you've got just like the World Trade Center. Now, and the other thing is that since the book came out, the harbingers have been coming true, and things are progressing. Example. The president went down to ground zero after the harbinger came out, and he was told to write words, inscribe on the beam that's going to be the top beam of the tower. It's going to complete the tower. So he could do anything, he can write any words he writes. What he writes in modern American prose, he writes Isaiah 9:10. We rebuild, we come back stronger than before. It matches the vow. When the ancient leaders of Israel pronounced this, it led to the destruction. Here you have the president, the highest words in America on the tower is going to be this. And Kevin, if you go in the Hebrew, the words that brought destruction, Isaiah 9:10, they were only 8 words in Hebrew. 8 words, the whole thing. The president writes 8 words. It's 8 English words that parallel the 8 English words of the Hebrew. on the tower. I mean, itself, which is the harbinger, which is the epitome of we will rebuild. So you got that. You have, at the same time, another thing that you have I'll just quickly say this, the tree of hope. You have the Erez tree and the harbinger. It's the
Right.
seventh harbinger. We can't go into all the detail except to say that the judgment on trees is a sign in the Bible of judgment on nations. We won't go into but this is the seventh harbinger. This was what was planted at ground zero to say we're coming back stronger and bigger and greater. And this was a symbol of America. That tree has been withering away.
Has it really?
Withering away since it, and Kevin, and just this last season, the tree of hope representing America was destroyed, was cut down, was destroyed, gone.
Wow, how symbolic.
And it was destroyed on a Hebrew holy day. And from what I was told, it was the day that led into the first blood moon.
Now, is this in your new book, or are you going to have
Yeah.
to write a third book?
Yeah, well, there's another book. There will be another book, but some of this is coming. But yeah, and here now speaking about the one that's coming, and that's why one of the reasons the Lord led me to write this is because we are coming to this, and I believe we need to be prepared. And we are entering now, at the time of this broadcast, the beginning of this next Shemitah.
Yes.
And the Shemitah, now the general pattern, again, I give two cautions. One is, God doesn't have to do anything, and He doesn't have to do it when we think He's doing it. On the other hand, God could do it as He's done it.
And we're in the last week of the 6th year of this present Shemitah.
Yeah, as we are recording,
As we record.
next week, I'm going to sound the trumpet in New Jersey, and it's going to begin with the Feast of Trumpets. Is the Shemitah is going to begin? When people are seeing this, it's just begun.
Right.
Now, generally, the pattern is that at the beginning you don't notice anything. The last two you wouldn't notice it, yet things were happening. Wall Street changed its momentum. You wouldn't have noticed, but it was the beginning. But the general pattern, if something's going to happen during this time, is that it's the end of it. It always reaches its peak at the end, which is, as you mentioned, it's September of 2015 or autumn of 2015.
Uh-huh.
And that's the period where in the last two you have the exact crashes, and then you have this period after that. So the thing is that we're leading to that period. Now people ask about the blood moons. Now, to say this, and not to get dogmatic,
Right.
but it's interesting. And Mark Biltz would say, it doesn't have to, but it's interesting. The period of the blood moons, the first half year have already gone. So what's left now is a year. The year that's left is the Shemitah. It's the Shemitah. So the Shemitah and the blood moons are happening at the same time or overlapping.
Yes, they are.
But here's something else here. There's something about, and again, we're not getting dogmatic. The Bible, God talks about, I will darken the sun. Now, it's one of the signs of judgment. Now, of course, there are solar eclipses, natural things. It doesn't mean that everyone means it's judgment. However, it could signal things at times. Now, what happens is if you look in the 2015, there are two solar eclipses, two darkenings of the sun. Each one will mark the Shemitah. One will mark the exact day that marks the exact center point of the Shemitah. That's when the sun will be darkened.
Okay.
And the other one will happen on Elul 29, the exact peak, the day of nullification of the Shemitah. And Kevin, here's another thing to throw in.
This is like a prophetic vortex.
It seems
it's like everything is coming to a head.
It seems so. And again, we're not being dogmatic, but it seems so. But here the thing is that when the tower in 2013, the tower, they put the spire to complete the height on the tower. The day they completed, they got that up. The day they did was a solar eclipse again. So here you have the tower linked to the solar eclipse.
Again.
The tower is most likely going to be finished in the Shemitah. I would keep my eyes on that tower. I believe this is a sign of defiance and judgment. And then we have all these convergences, all these things coming together at the same time. Now here's another interesting thing. The day when Elul 29 comes this time, it's on Sunday. So the stock market's closed. So the stock market can't do its crash. But interesting, the last day the stock market's open is going to be 9/11.
Oh,
that's going to
boy.
lead into Elul 29. Now I'll say something else. Now I'll say this: whether something happens during this year of Shemitah or not, and again we touched on this. I'm not one who sets dates, but in this book I do give all the dates, and I do want people to be ready in the mystery of the Shemitah. But the thing is that I do believe a great shaking is coming to this nation. I believe it will strike the financial realm, the economic realm, and it will be even bigger than that. Like 9/11 happened, it wasn't originally economic, it was a terror attack. So I believe there's going to be even greater than economic and financial, but it will affect all these things. Be as, in a sense, a famine in the land. Now, whether this happens in this period or beyond, I believe very strongly this is coming, and we need to be prepared. Now, one of the things is, as we shared, the harbingers are continuing, as we're talking. We just touched on before, you and I were talking about one of the harbingers, which is the second harbinger, which is the harbinger of the terrorist. And that is that in ancient Israel, when you had that first strike warning, it was brought about by the Assyrians, who were the masters of terrorism. People don't realize the Assyrians invented terrorism. You look at history, they invented terrorism.
This is the ancient Assyrian Empire that was headquartered in Nineveh.
Yes.
And they did. They literally sought to inspire fear and terror in their enemies.
Absolutely.
And they would skin and flay them alive.
They
decapitate them.
Yes, they invented terror as a form of literally strategy, and every terrorist to this day is a descendant spiritually, or and can be more than that, of the Assyrians. So you have the sign of the second harbinger in the harbinger is the sign of the Assyrian or the terrorist. So that this first strike on the nation is an act of terror, which happened to America 9/11. So I've always been wondering since then, because the pattern is that Israel, when it had that first strike by the Assyrians, but then years later, they didn't repent, but years later, they enter into another conflict with Assyria. And what happens is this second conflict brings destruction to the land.
That's all right. It destroys the temple of the northern kingdom, Samaria, and they are deported and carried away.
Yeah. So you have the same people who brought the first strike of terror. They are the ones, the nation gets into another conflict, and they bring the calamity. Well, so I'm watching, is America going to be involved in another calamity, another thing there? Well, just recently, I was in the Capitol. The Lord called me to speak to members of Congress. The President made a speech that night. He announced we are going to war with ISIS. ISIS is that they are centered in the same area,
same geographic area,
the core of ancient Assyria. That's Syria and Iraq. Iraq is ancient Assyria. They just took over Mosul, which is Nineveh.
Yes.
They are already being likened like no other people to the ancient Assyrians. They are bloodthirsty. They inflict terror on their people. They are an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, which means it's the same people. Here's the pattern: the same people as who did the strike of 9/11, and they are, the Assyrians literally decapitated their victims and they put them on display. ISIS decapitates their victims, puts them on display in social media, just like what the Assyrians would do to this day.
Inspire terror.
Yeah, so here we are. It's a bit chilling. We are now entering the second part of this, and they are terrorists. And the thing is, when the president announced this, it was the eve of 9/11 when he
said this.
When he announced it. And literally the date was 9/10. Isaiah 9:10 is the vow. I'm not saying,
and you and I are calling them ISIS, and my research leads me to believe that our president and others refer to them as ISIL.
Yes.
But that's Islamic State of Iran and the Levant.
Yes.
And I'm told that the Levant is a term that means the whole region.
Yes.
And there's no Israel in there.
No, of course.
It's the obliteration of Israel.
Yes.
So when you declare ISIL, you're saying no Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. And they would like no America too.
Of course. We're the great Satan.
Yes.
Israel's the little Satan.
And when the president made his speech, he did a weird thing. And there's always things, because here we're watching leaders actually voice these judgment things without even realizing these are signs. But he says, basically, the Harbinger and the Shemitah talk about two shakings. You have 9/11, and then you have the economic collapse in 2008. He says 13 years ago, basically, we had this great shaking. And then he says 6 years ago, we had the economic shaking.
Do the math.
He mentioned 7 years apart. Well, number one, they're 7 years apart.
13 and minus 6.
And when you add the 7, they come to the next completion.
15.
And he announced this on the eve of 9/11. And this is all.
He doesn't maybe even know what he's saying, because
he doesn't anymore.
The high priest prophesied in the year that Jesus was the week that Jesus was crucified. And he didn't know he spoke prophecy.
That's what's
God will speak through anyone when He chooses to.
Yes, that's what's happening with the harbingers, and then the president writing on the tower. So the thing is that we are heading now. The point of the Shemitah ultimately is to bring, always was, to bring the nation back to God. That's the
Amen.
point. It's a shaking where everything else is shaken, everything else the nation trusts in is shaken, and it's to bring the nation back to God. I believe a great shaking is coming, but the point of it is to bring the
Amen.
nation and all those who will listen back to God. That's why I wrote the book. And things are coming.
And it is a word of hope, Jonathan.
Ultimately,
and I thank you for
absolutely.
that word of hope.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I want to say to all of you, we do have a book offer. You can get this wonderful book, The Mystery of the Shemitah, and we're throwing in a bonus DVD of an 89-minute presentation Jonathan made about this topic, and that can be yours for $16.95 plus shipping and handling. And you call the 800 number on your screen, or you can get on the website, bookstore, and order it. Also, if you haven't read The Harbinger, we put this all together in one deluxe package for $29.95 plus shipping and handling. So please take advantage of that. And you know, as our time begins to come to a close here, I do want to end on that word hope. The ancient nation of Assyria was ultimately destroyed by God, but one generation prior, God sent a prophet named Jonah. And he had a simple message: 40 days and Nineveh will fall. And we joke sometimes, we'll see somebody on the street corner with a sign that says turn or burn. Well, Jonah had a sign that just said burn, baby, burn. But you know, they didn't know, but they turned. The king of Assyria, brutal though he was, heard the voice of God, and he repented, and he called his people to fast and pray. And God spared them. Now, he didn't spare the nation ultimately, but he spared a generation. And God will deal with each generation at a time. And even though he has a timetable, only he knows the mystery of that timetable. There is hope. And you know, as we have quoted these verses to you from Joel 2:30 about the sun being darkened and the blood moon, I want to remember that those verses were pulled out by Peter on the day of Pentecost. When the church launched forth and the ministry to the nations began, Peter chose that very passage, and he said, what you're seeing here is that, this is that. God said, I'll pour out my Spirit on all flesh, and your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, your old men will dream dreams, there will be signs in the heavens above, they will be shaken, the sun will be darkened, the moon will be turned to blood. But then he said, and whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. So the church age was birthed in this very prophecy of the blood moon and the shaking, and it's going to end that way. But until that comes, if you call on the name of the Lord, you may be saved. Till then, this is Kevin Clarkson with Prophecy in the News. Let's keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported program made possible by our many friends around the world. Write to us at Prophecy in the News, P.O. Box 7000, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 73153, or email us at prophecyinthenews@yahoo.com. Be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/prophecyinthenews, and follow us on Twitter at PITN News.